Most of you already know James and are familiar with his wonderful work at the Rose O'Neill Literary House at Washington College, where he also teaches. And I'm sure that you already know that he's written 2 books of poems and a book of essays, and that he is really bringing an enormous amount of like literary richness to Chestertown and to Washington College. I have been to poetry readings, and I remember one really wonderful sort of combination poetry and music and just I don't even, maybe there was another kind of reading as well, and it was just my favorite thing about it was that it was all part of it. It wasn't like we were siloing, well, today we're doing poetry and tomorrow we're doing music. It was all part of it. And that's how I see RiverArts, is that, we are encouraging and nurturing all kinds of arts among all kinds of parts of our community. And so I love this little collaboration that we've got here. And I'll just, last thing that I will say is that when I first met James, it was when we were planning a party in honor of my grandmother's life, my grandmother, Mary Wood, who I think a lot of you know, and who had her name on a wall in a room in the literary house. And it was a odd time for me, obviously, having just lost my grandmother and trying to plan this event. And James was just the most wonderfully warm and generous and friendly and accommodating presence in the literary house. And it just made me feel like everything was going to be okay. And like my grandmother, no matter what happened, my grandmother's life was going to be properly celebrated because it was happening in a place that is hosted by this incredibly warm and wonderful human being. So that's my little shout out to James. And with that, I will turn it over to James so that he can kind of lead us. I know he's got some good plans for the way that we are going to look at the poem and the photograph that we're going to talk about today. So.
Thank you so much, Mariah. And I just want to say that it was my honor and pleasure to help put that celebration together for your grandmother, who just means the world to Chestertown and to the Lit House. She's enriched so many students' lives. And so, maybe at the end we can have a toast to Mary Wood. That'd be kind of great.
Great idea.
Yeah. Although I'll be toasting with water because I'm on antibiotics right now. And I will also say, I still have the only voicemail I have saved on my phone is one from your grandmother, who was calling. I don't know why she was calling. It was the October before she passed, and she just said, it's the funniest thing. I guess they said, you've reached James. I don't know what my message says, but and she just said, well, I already knew that, and hung up. And it was so funny. I just have always kept it just to hear her voice occasionally. Anyway, so thank you for inviting me tonight. During the semester I would teach during this time, so I couldn't join earlier. And today I submitted my grades. So I'm all yours. I'm very excited about submitting the grades. The students did really well, and I kind of miss them, but I'll get over it. And I'm just glad to be here to talk about this poem by Kate Daniels, a poem I really love, about a terrible historical event, a horrific and powerful photo. And I hope that it will, I'm reminded during these really difficult times what beauty means to us and how beauty can kind of transform, right? These sort of dark times, how we need it. We were just talking about the importance of having a Christmas tree, right? Just the lights and the darkness. And I think that's what art provides us. I'm really thankful to RiverArts for providing that for folks in our community too. So I kind of want to have, do you all have the poem with you?
Mm.
Or
Mhm.
available? Some of you don't. So let's see if I can put it in the chat. Yeah, maybe I can. Will it? So if you don't have it, I think it's in the email, but let's see if I can make it a little bit easier.
Would you like me to share my screen and show it that way?
Yeah, we could do that that way, or I'm gonna, yeah, I put it in the chat as well. So hopefully, or maybe I just sent it to Anne because that's who I was chatting with earlier. And it won't let me do anything else. So yeah, I can share my screen or you can?
Either way, I've got it right here if you want me to do that, or if you want to have the power of the screen.
Well, I'll share. It's right here.
There you go. Okay. Perfect.
All right. Great. And so let me. Could I have a volunteer to read the poem, and then I'll read it too? Don't be shy.
I'll do it if nobody else will, but I think somebody else should.
I was thinking the same thing.
Come on.
I'll read the beginning. I haven't read this before, so I haven't even looked at it yet. But I'll.
Oh, that's totally fine, and I'll read it afterwards too. But yeah, I'll scroll down for you. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
War photograph. A naked child is running along the path toward us. Her arms stretched out, her mouth open, the world turned to trash behind her. She is running from the smoke and the soldiers, from the bodies of her mother and little sister thrown down into a ditch, from the blown up bamboo hut, from the melted pots and pans. And she is also running from the gods who have changed the sky to fire and puddled the earth with skin and blood. She is running, my God, to us 10,000 miles away. Reading the caption beneath her picture in a weekly magazine. All over the country, we're feeling sorry for her and being appalled at the war being fought in the other world. She keeps on running, you know, after the shutter of the camera clicks. She's running to us. For how can she know, her feet beating a path on another continent? How can she know what we really are? From the distance, we look so terribly human.
Thank you. That was really well read, especially if you hadn't looked at it before. That's great. And I'll just read it one more time so we can just have it in our heads a little bit more. War photograph. A naked child is running along the path toward us. Her arms stretched out, her mouth open, the world turned to trash behind her. She is running from the smoke and the soldiers, from the bodies of her mother and little sister thrown down into a ditch, from the blown up bamboo hut, from the melted pots and pans. And she is also running from the gods who have changed the sky to fire and puddled the earth with skin and blood. She is running, my God, to us, 10,000 miles away, reading the caption beneath her picture in a weekly magazine. All over the country, we're feeling sorry for her and being appalled at the war being fought in the other world. She keeps on running, you know, after the shutter of the camera clicks. She's running to us. For how can she know, her feet beating a path on another continent? How can she know what we really are? From the distance, we look so terribly human. All right, I'll stop sharing my screen, but you can download the poem if you need to look at it again through the email, through the invitation email, or you can figure out how to get it in the chat maybe. So I guess I want to have a discussion about the poem and its movements. So if you could just tell me like what you noticed about the poem or what you remember about the poem without even looking at it. What are the things that that Kate Daniels, the poet, like makes you see?
One of the things that struck me is I've seen this photograph before. It was in a exhibit at the museum when there was a museum in DC about the Vietnam War. And I think it won the Pulitzer Prize. It was the number of times that running occurred in the narrative. And it's about a stationary photograph. But the girl is always running. And it sets a perspective, taking that girl out of a static composition and bringing her sequentially toward us, the reader, 10,000 miles away usually, was really deftly handled, I thought, and very impactful.
Yeah, and I hadn't counted until you just mentioned that, but the poem, which it's not a long poem, but it mentions the word running 6 times. That's a lot in that little poem, right? So yeah, so the kinetic action of running, which what kind of emotion does that spark in us? And Michael doesn't have to do all the heavy lifting there, but you're right about the context of it as well. That it was a Pulitzer Prize-winning photograph. I didn't know that it was in the museum. God rest its soul. But yeah, and it's a really famous photograph. I'm not going to show it, although there's a link to it in the invitation email too. So if you want to refresh your memory about it, because I think the poem can stand alone from it, right? But the emphasis on running, like, what does that spark in us? What does that emotion get at?
Well, I think part of it is escape, of course. Another part is fright. And I think a third part is wanting to rejoin, running towards something.
Yeah, I think all 3 of those things. First, just like a naked child is running to us. And so the nakedness of the child is really important, right? It expresses vulnerability. Vulnerability, sort of a forced vulnerability, right? And urgency, emergency, those kinds of things, right? A need to escape, right?
I think it also
Yeah.
there's something about the innocence of a naked child that, especially when you contrast it with what struck me was this question sort of about who we are, and are we humans, or are we gods who've turned the sky to fire, or is she running innocently toward other human beings who are have something in common with her, or is she running towards monsters of some kind or gods of some kind?
Yeah, that is.
Well, there's a clue. There's a clue in that they say not who we are, but what we are. I thought that stopped me too, that phrase. And she's running still, right? She will run forever.
She will run forever. Yeah.
Yeah, because of what we really are.
And because he's captured her in that moment. But the sense of what that photograph says to us will endure with us forever, I think, once you've seen it.
Completely, right? And the poem is different from the photograph because of that last part, right? All over the country, we're feeling sorry for her, right? It implicates our pity, right? At the same time that it implicates our consumerism. We've got this magazine, right? It was published in Time. And we've turned this moment into something that we can safely consume 10,000 miles away in another world, right? That's not our world. We're safe over here, right? And so the poem becomes an implication of who and what we are. Is that human to do that? To look at this and just feel pity? Is that what we're supposed to do? And so I think the poem like makes me uncomfortable at the end, especially with the we, right? Like I don't want to belong to that we, but I have belonged to that we, right?
Mm.
Well, we do belong to that we. We still
We
do.
do.
We still do.
We still do.
Yeah.
So I think
remember
I
that.
find it a little hard that suddenly it's all about us.
Yeah.
I mean, the poem sort of, it's about her, and then suddenly, no, it's about poor us. What are we going to do? What do we feel like, who we are? And I don't know. That's troublesome to me.
Well, I think the whole,
And it feels so American.
Yeah. I
Sorry.
think the whole poem set up that she's running to us is wrong. She's not running to us.
She's
Right.
running from us.
Right.
Well, she's running from what we have done to her. I mean, it's a naked girl with a burned body, and she's screaming and running down the road. She's not running to us. She's running away from horror.
And so what
And
else, if we're the gods that turn the sky to fire, right? What else have we done in the first part of that first half of the poem? What are the other actions that have been done around the girl?
Well,
Her
it's
mother and her daughter, or mother and her sister were killed.
Right.
And
Yeah.
her house was, her life was destroyed.
Her
And-
pots and pans were melted.
Yeah. I mean, I remember that photograph when it was first published, and it hit me. And
Yeah.
that last line of this poem really, really hit me, because she wasn't running to us.
Yeah.
You know, she was running away from what we had done, and from
Well, and that's the poet says, the speaker of the poem says she's running, my God, to us, right? Like that moment of my God, like she's running to us. We did this, right?
Well, it was actually the South Vietnamese who did that attack I read today, or I think it was in that essay from the Times. Although we can't say we weren't responsible.
right. And so, yeah, no, the mother and the little sister thrown down into a ditch. Let's talk about thrown down. What do you throw? What do you throw down?
Garbage.
What are the garbage, right? And is there trash in the poem?
Yeah.
melted
and
pots
that's-
and pans.
In that first stanza, right? Turn the world to her mouth open, the world turned to trash behind her, right? And so I think we also have a question about what's valued, who's valued, right? In the poem, what's consumable, what's not consumable, right? What's valuable, what's not valuable, what's tradable, what's not tradable, right?
Yeah, but it also speaks to the value of her life before it was destroyed. I mean, she had a valuable life with pots and pans and with mothers and sisters and a home.
Right.
And she's running from the destruction of that, and also from the pain and the horror.
Because someone has seen her as trash and made her life trash, right? I mean, something has thrown those people down into the ditch, right?
I don't think I wouldn't say people see her as trash. They were just people are expendable in wars, in any war.
Right. But if you see people as if soldiers or governments see people as expendable in war, then they're not much better than trash, if not just trash.
No.
Right. Yeah. And so I guess that's what I think that's why the poet, why Kate Daniels, who's a white woman who lives in Nashville, uses that diction of trash and then thrown down in reference to the mother and the sister's little bodies, right? So that way we can see the objectification and objectification, right, with an A, of these people, right? So there's that, but then it turns on an to the inner gaze, right? Like to us, right? And so like Margot's question about like, yeah, I have a problem, like the reading of this poem as about us, but I think that that's part of the issue, right? Is like, if we just see this girl and the horrors that she's lived through, suffered through, and not ask the question, who did this and who are we? Like, then maybe
Yeah.
it'll happen again, right? And I think just a description of a Vietnamese girl by a white woman would be really problematic. I mean, this poem was published before we started kind of thinking about questions of cultural appropriation. But I wanted us to think about it today because I think that it turns away from appropriating that person's terror the way that the photograph kind of does, although I think it was an important photograph for the ways that it helped bring home what was happening, right? I mean, this was, you know, a photograph published before, published before I was born, in a war that was fought before I was born too. So, you know, I'm saying these things, and maybe you all have better things to say about its publication and witnessing it, right? But I think that the photograph was shocking, right?
Well, I think one of the things that we have to remember is that for the West, certainly, the Vietnam War was the first time the average citizen really saw the results of war. And that photograph is particularly shocking. I mean, we are still shocked by the pictures of the children in cages at the border with little pieces of tin foil or whatever the silver stuff is. We're still shocked, but it makes us, many of us, stop and think, but it's not the same shock that the Vietnam War brought to the average American, that suddenly this is what we're doing. This is the result, or these are the consequences of what we're doing. And people say, then why are we doing this? And that's,
Yeah. So I would say they learned, the government, whoever, learned their lesson with Vietnam. And we have never seen images that fresh and that immediate with any subsequent war. It's been, I don't know if you want to say we've been protected from it, because we haven't. We need to know these things.
well, you remember
But we have, because like under Bush, photographers were not allowed to take pictures of
the caskets.
the caskets coming off the planes because it would be too upsetting.
Yeah.
There should,
Well, and we invented drones, right? So that it would be entirely removed from human.
We certainly use drones for
reality.
that.
yeah.
But
I would carry this thread a little bit more. Like, I mean, I think that the invention of photography, video to capture atrocity did something for the way that certain people can experience those things, right? Because I think we can also say that there are certain people in our world that experience this way more than others, right? So it's shocking, but for whom, right? Thinking about like videotapings of police officers killing Black people, that, right? Like, you know, it's not shocking to Black folks that this has happened. I teach a poem that was published in 1972 by Gwendolyn Brooks called "The Boy Died in My Alley," and my students asked me like, "This was published, you know, 50 years ago, but like it's still happening. Why is it still happening?" Like, shocking to whom, right? This kind of violence or atrocity, right? And so that's, I think, kind of what the poem is questioning, right? Is like, when this was published, right? For whom was it published? For whom was this news? Who needed a different way of seeing the world as unjust, right? And I think that's what poems have to do. I think poems now have to not just describe the atrocity, but also to implicate the viewer of the atrocity, right? As someone who is participating in it in some way, right? I think that the final question of the poem is, who do we want to be?
It's interesting. I especially because the last word of the poem is human, even though it's terribly human. I was thinking about that very same thing that you were just saying, kind of like, what is the reason for photojournalism and what is the reason for a poem written about this kind of photo? And, you know, obviously it is to have some kind of a transformative impact on the readers who are, we're the readers. It's not, you know, anyone in Vietnam. But what hit me about it is that the poem was trying to make us feel that connection of shared humanity with this little girl who we would not, you know, this wouldn't have happened to her had we felt as a, you know, as an acting agent, had we felt that shared humanity. I think at least that's what I would choose to believe, is that it's the dehumanization that allows us to do that. And the same with, you know, the killings of Black men and women. So to me, the focus is less on the implication of us as kind of complicit and more on, so what are you going to do about it now that you feel this connection?
That's it. Yeah. Like, are you going to stop at feeling sorry for her 10,000 miles away? The cameras are already clicked, right? I mean, we can kind of now see on like Facebook Live or Instagram Live or these social media platforms, we can see things as they happen, but that wasn't the case 50 years ago, right? And it's not mostly the case, right? Like there's some kind of delay in between, right? But the artifice of the photo is that it's so immediate, right? But the poem takes us out of that immediacy to think about, yeah, now that you know, what are you going to do with your agency, right? What are you going to do about it? Are you going to sit there and talk about this photo, or are you going to go and like go to a protest, right? And yeah, I mean, I think that's what our country was asking at that point too.
I think one of the things that photograph did was make the Vietnamese no longer be other. In you know, the culture I grew up in, where, you know, my brother was in Vietnam, they were gooks, they were slant eyes, they were commies, they were all these enemies. And then it's this naked little girl. And as long as you can see people as other, then it's much easier to make them less than, and therefore not as human or as deserving or equal in any way. And I think that's what's happened. That's what was going on in Vietnam. That's what's gone on the whole history of this country with people of color. You know, black, red, yellow, brown.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. We can, if we make them other, we can disassociate the ways in which we've treated those bodies and those people, right? And we can erase them without thinking about it. We can erase their histories. We can erase their sufferings at our hands, right? I wonder what we think about the role of memory or monument. Sort of like last question. We have like, another 10, 15 minutes or so, maybe less. But like a friend just sent me a photograph. For queer people, there's this weird, for queer people of a certain age, I should say, there's this weird gruesome pilgrimage we make to the spot where Matthew Shepard died in Montana. I mean, it's just so many of us have gone to that place and taken a photograph. So a friend was just moving across the country and sent me, not knowing that I'd done this myself, but they sent me this photograph of this place. And I was just thinking that the people who owned that land like took down the fence that he was tied to. There's no marker at all. You have to kind of know how to get there, but somehow we find our way to it. And I was just, I was angry that the fence was taken down. I'm angry about it, but I don't know if I should be.
Mm.
I was really wrestling with it, right? Like, do we take these pictures because they serve a really important purpose of documenting what happened, right? To whom and by whom? Do we write these poems and say, what is it to be human and a monster at the same time, right? With this sort of power of othering that we've talked about. And I think that's important for art, but I wonder what role forgetting has too.
James, I was thinking about like sort of the importance and meaningfulness of photojournalism, but then also like the voyeuristic nature, like we're using a particular person, a particular place, a particular image to teach us something. And then like Margot started out by saying, that's no longer about the person, it becomes about us. And so on one hand, I mean, I think all of this art is important because we have to remember, in some ways, we have to learn. But then at the same time, then it becomes its own thing. And then it becomes less about who we're honoring or remembering and more about us. And so that's a strange dichotomy.
Mm. Mm. So another thing that bothers me with that is a kind of a conundrum for me, I guess, with any of these particularly influential photographs is, what was the photographer doing? That naked child is running to him in pain and he stops and takes a photo. Fortunately, according to the piece that you added, he helped her before he even developed the film. But very often with photos that are similar, I wrestle with what's the role of the photographer in that situation. It's important to have us see what's happening, but that the human part of me says, no, you don't stop and take a picture, you help, So I don't think there's an answer to that, but it occurred to me again as I was looking at this photograph, which is just iconic. So
Yeah, that's such a really hard question to wrestle with. You think about, George Floyd, and somebody stood there. I mean, we know who it was. Stood there and filmed that murder for 8.5 minutes, and so she probably wouldn't have been able to prevent it any more than the photographer of that girl could have prevented the napalm. But it is, I mean, I guess it's such a hard question because it was so important to take that picture and it was so important to make that video. And it's, in both cases, really changed the world, not enough maybe, or in unpredictable ways, but it's hard to say don't do it. but it's also hard to imagine standing there and doing that instead of letting the human part of you act.
I have a question, going back to this otherness, other people and photography. And I'm trying to work this through my mind. I'm thinking of Margaret Bourke-White, who did those wonderful photographs of the Dust Bowl and the migrations. And those people were not the others, they were us. And what was the reaction, or what is our reaction to those photographs, as opposed to, say, photographs of the other blacks getting killed or roughed up by the police, little Vietnamese girls running, Latino kids being put into cages? Is there a different reaction?
A great question.
I mean, I do think that those Dust Bowl migrants were othered to some extent. I mean, they were kind of labeled, they were called Okies. We read about them.
Hillbillies.
Hillbilly, yeah. But yeah, not as much, right?
Not as
Right.
much.
Yeah. And what was the purpose of her photographs as opposed to the purpose of the photograph of the little girl? Is there a difference? Is there a difference in the document, or the reason behind the documentation?
Well, I think, I was reading a little bit about the photographer, and he was part of a press pool. And if you look at the original photograph, there were actually photographers along that road that she is running on. And oftentimes they're cropped out of the picture. I think they were cropped out of the picture that was published by the New York Times on its front page.
Oh,
And apparently the photographer became lifelong friends with this girl. He not only took her to a hospital in Saigon, where she stayed for months and had innumerable surgeries and eventually was mobile again, but according to the Wikipedia entry, he called her every day. So in this case, he was there on assignment. He was covering the war, and there were multiple other images by other photographers of this scene that did become as iconic as the one that's the subject of this poem. So I think that answers your question. He was reporting the news. Apparently what happened was that the North Vietnamese mistook these civilians who were running from their village in a temple for soldiers and dropped the bombs on them by mistake. So he caught kind of a war crime in the moment that it happened.
Yeah, I think there's something about art that gives us back to ourselves, right? That fills back in the lines that have been erased, the realities that have been erased, the stories we don't want to live with, right? Be they, poverty or war or racial injustice, right? But I think that that's what art can do, is sort of make that, make real the unjust, right? The lives that get pushed to margins or get erased out of history books, right? That's what I guess I would say about the reason I think we are in this poem as much as she is, right? Or even more, right? Because it wants to raise questions about, like, how do we look at this? How do we keep this, right? And how do we act afterwards? I love this. I love, Michael, that you've read that. I didn't know that about the photographer calling and staying in touch with the subject of the photograph, right? That's really moving, right?
I thought so. Very moving.
It is. It makes me think about the photographer as the voice in the poem more than I did before, because she's running. It makes me imagine her running toward him.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating the way that the poem sort of lenses how close we are, and then how we sort of get farther away, which also means, like, we're close, we can do something, and then we're farther away, we can't do something, or are we, right? Or can we?
Yeah, and it turns it around too, because it talks about us as the gods and then as humans, and also shows us this little girl as a subject, but also as a human. So I think you're there's a lot of different lenses.
I agree. Like, I just love how this poem moves around and moves us around too, you know? And I think that that's what art can do, that it really can just flip your perspective.
I keep thinking about the poem and the photograph and how they're reflecting these atrocities and how we use the atrocities they're reflecting to hopefully prevent future ones. And I just can't help but ask, like, can we stop having atrocities so that we, you know, or what can we do with art now that it can prevent future atrocities besides use the ones that have already happened? You know, what other things can we do to prevent these same things happening again and again?
I think once we have more empathy, which is what this kind of art does, right? That we're less likely to turn people into others and less likely to commit them. So I think we just need more art education in schools, right? That's my answer as a teacher.
I'm with you, and in civic life too.
That's right, exactly. That's why we're, you know, we're all like part of these kind of artist communities, right? I think we need more people to join us.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say thank you to all of you for taking some time to think about these questions. They're not easy questions. This is my idea of a good time on a Tuesday night. I'm glad it's your idea of a good time on a Tuesday night. I feel like I learned a lot about this poem too, and the photograph. So I just want to say thank you to each of you for sharing your insights. This was really fun.
James, thank you for being here and sharing your time and talent with us, you know, at the end of a long and very unusual semester. And when you were telling Mariah and I a little bit how you wanted to organize tonight, I was all excited because I felt like I was going to get to be a college student again. You know, it was a little more interactive and participatory, which in some ways is what we had hoped for, I think, all the salons, you know, this kind of discussion and really delving into things. So thank you for putting on your teacher hat and organizing us and making us participate tonight. It's been really thought-provoking.
My pleasure.
Yay. And Mariah, I was going to end with tonight's toast, which I usually pull something out of, you know, the talk, and we talk about empathy, and, you know, but we talked at the beginning about your grandma, and I don't know her. And I wonder if you could, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but weave empathy and your grandma into a short toast for us to close out and wave goodbye.
Yes, I wish that I had come prepared with a little poem that she had written. There's one on my wall, but I can't read it. my eyes are too bad. Well, I think, yes, I think empathy and the power of art and the power of seeing other people as fellow travelers, fellow human beings who, you know, may have all kinds of surface differences and may be living in very different times and places and ways, but are all still bound together on this earth, as we have really found this year with this global pandemic, where everybody on the whole planet is facing this exact same challenge in different ways. And so I think, you know, that's probably one of the most profound lessons that I learned from my grandmother, Mary Wood, not explicitly, but just by observing her sort of constant creative mind, and, you know, all the ideas that she would have from, you know, low income housing for the people who were living under the bridge at Kent Narrows, and, you know, writing therapy, and the Churchill Theater and the Literary House. And I mean, I could go on and on. And I think that what I gleaned or osmosed from that was that everybody needs something and everybody can do something about that. And, you know, I think that's part of how I came to believe that, you know, we're all human beings, and that poem was telling us that, and not that it was blaming us. So I think, Anne, that's a perfect toast for our final salon of the year. Please join us next month for more salons. We have really cool stuff planned. And do you want to, I don't want to drag this out too long, but do you want to tell about that really exciting email that we got?
Well, we are looking ahead to the new year, and we have really enjoyed reaching out within Chestertown, and then finding our friends in Chestertown who know people other places. And I think it was our Dickens salon with Natalie Wood, who I literally just Googled Dickens scholar and found her from Boston University, and she said yes. And I get excited when all of you, James, and everybody says yes, because it's really cool. But it's given us an idea that we can reach farther and wider, and maybe it's taken us a little while to kind of figure that out. But I, on a whim earlier today, emailed a lady who's a physicist and is a scholar at New York, I think New York, somewhere in New York, but then also with the American Museum of Natural History, the museum up in New York City. And she's doing a talk for the museum on patterns in nature and how neural patterns mimic patterns we see in nature and all that. So I just was like, it can't hurt to ask. So I emailed her earlier and was like, so this is who we are and this is what we do. And she was like, oh my gosh, I'd love to come talk to you all in the new year. So one of the things I'll ask all of you, and I was thinking we would do in January when we kind of come back after the holidays, is, as you all know people, I mean, each of you here has an amazing story to tell. And I think we want to reach far, but also near, as we look to the new year, to learn from you, your friends, and people you may know far away that live in other countries or in other parts of the US. And we can bring those folks in to do salons with and for us. And that was just an exciting reminder. So thank you all for your presence. And we look forward to doing all sorts of neat things in the new year.
Yes. So
Great.
sorry for that digression, but I was excited about our plans for the new
I
year.
was too. I sent writing an email like, holy cow, she said that. Yay. And we felt the same way with you, James. Yay, he said yes.
We really
So
did.
Thank you so much.
And everybody, I'm so grateful for the people who have been willing to share their time and their expertise and their humanity with us. So to empathy and to the human connection, and I suppose another way of saying that is peace on earth and goodwill to all people.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Happy holidays to all. Thank you again.
Cheers. Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you all. Please come back. James, thank you so much. I hope that
My
you will
pleasure.
be willing to do this again, because
Oh,
this
anytime
was
you like.
absolutely one of the best ones that we've had.
Nice to see you, James.
Good to see you
Mariah,
all.
Great.
Your grandmother was
Wonderful.
incredible.
Yeah.
She was incredible. I wish that she could do a salon. Oh my gosh.
I
Can you
know.
Oh, that would be
Yeah.
fantastic.
Maybe we could channel her somehow.
I know.
right?
Maybe we could. I wonder. Get some of the theater people who knew her to
Right.
take
yeah.
her character on.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, have a great night, everybody. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
all.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye
Well,
for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
James, before you log off, I have a
Yeah.
quick question for you.
Sure.
It's not even really a question, but it just, when you were talking about going to Wyoming, so we moved to Fairfax, I mentioned a couple months ago, and my daughter's a junior in high school, and she's at Fairfax High School, and their play that they did this fall was the Laramie Project. And
Oh, wow.
it was incredible. The kids all recorded their parts from home, and then their teacher put them all together with the assistance of folks from the actual Laramie Project, which was a theater who had gone to Wyoming and
Yeah,
interviewed a lot
yeah.
of people.
Yep.
And it was so powerful.
That's so cool.
And I mean, I hadn't really put together that was also a memorial spot, or that the fence had been taken down, and just the questions you raised about that, a memorial versus a spot that people go to, but there's nothing there to, physically. It just really made me think, and I wanted to tell you, I appreciate that, because I've really, the last couple months, they just did the show last month, and I feel like I've, learned a lot more. I mean, I remember when Matthew Shepard was killed and when it was in the news, and it was just horrifying. But all these years later, to see that dramatized, I didn't really know, and they don't dramatize, that, but just the interviews they do with the people in the town. It was really eye-opening. Yeah, it was really interesting. And they have footage, of the town that then they interspersed with all the kids' scenes of, just, being interviewed and everything else. But yeah, I had no idea that that was a spot that, is important, and hopefully how far we've come, but then at the same time, with everything in the world, how far we've not. So, but thank you I just wanted to say thanks for sharing that with me.
Oh, sure. No, I'm so glad that in high school they're doing the Laramie Project. That's fucking amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it really was. And it was a great experience for everyone involved, and a very emotional experience. And but thank you. It's a joy to meet you. I look forward to interacting again in the future, either on Zoom or hopefully in person sometime. But thanks for taking the time.
Oh, sure. And tell Greg I said, hey.
I will. And thanks so much.
All right.
Have a great holiday.
You too. Bye for now.
Bye.
Ciao.